Part 2, A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand. From Rousseau to the present day. From the latter part of the 18th century to the present day, art and literature and philosophy and even politics have been influenced positively or negatively by a way of feeling which was characteristics of what, in a large sense, may be called the romantic movement. They admire strong passions of no matter what kind and whatever may be their social consequences. Romantic love, especially when unfortunate, is strong enough to win their approval. Rousseau, 1712 to 1778. He had a powerful influence on philosophy, on literature, and taste and manners and politics. He enjoyed making himself out a great sinner and sometimes exaggerated in this respect. I believe in God as strongly as I believe any other truth, because believing and not believing are the last things in the world that depend on me. What we call democracy, Rousseau calls elective aristocracy. He says is the best of all governments, but it is not suitable to all countries. Philosophy in the 18th century was dominated by the British, of whom Locke, Berkeley, and Hume may be taken as the representative. In Germany, the reaction against Hume took a form far more profound. Kant, Fichte, and Hegel developed a new kind of philosophy intended to safeguard both knowledge and virtue from the subversive doctrines of the late 18th century. Fichte and Hegel both set forth political doctrines which had and still have a profound influence upon the course of history. Kant, 1724 to 1804, is generally considered the greatest of modern philosophers. Kant was a man of such regular habits that people used to set their watches by him as he passed their doors. Kant was a liberal both in politics and in theology. The intellectual life of the 19th century was more complex than that of any previous age. This was due to several causes. First, the area concerned was larger than ever before. America and Russia made important contributions, and Europe became more aware than formerly of Indian philosophies, both ancient and modern. Second, science, which had been a chief source of novelty since the 17th century, made new conquests, especially in geology, biology, and organic chemistry. Third, machine production profoundly altered the social structure and gave men a new conception of their powers in relation to the physical environment. Fourth, a profound revolt, both philosophical and political, against traditional systems in thought, in politics, and in economics, gave rise to attacks upon many beliefs and institutions. The Romantic Revolt passes from Schopenhauer and Nietzsche to Mussolini and Hitler. The Rationalistic Revolt begins with the French philosophers of the Revolution, passes on, somewhat softened to the philosophical radicals in England, then acquires a deep form in Marx and issues in Soviet Russia. While Galileo and Newton were to the 17th century, Darwin was to the 19th. Darwin's theory had two parts. On the one hand, there was the doctrine of evolution, which maintained that the different forms of life had developed gradually from a common ancestry. This doctrine, which is now generally accepted, was not new. The second part of Darwin's theory was the struggle for existence and the survival of the fittest. All animals and plants multiply faster than nature can provide for them. Therefore, in each generation, many perish before the age for reproducing themselves. In a given environment, members of the same species compete for survival, and those best adapted to the environment have the best chance. Darwin himself was a liberal. Hegel, 1770 to 1831, was a German philosopher that started from Kant. Although he often criticized Kant, his system could never have arisen if Kant's had not existed. Hegel's philosophy is very difficult. I should say the hardest to understand of all the great philosophers. Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, is in many ways peculiar among philosophers. He is pessimist, whereas almost all the others are in some sense optimistic. He is unusually free from nationalism and as much at home with English and French writers as with those of his own country. Historically, two things are important about Schopenhauer: his pessimism and his doctrine that will is superior to knowledge. Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. Nietzsche, though a professor, was a literary rather than academic philosopher. He invented no new technical theories. I shall confine myself almost entirely to his ethics and his criticism of religion, since it was this aspect of his writing that made him influential. He was brilliant at the university and he was a student, so much so that in 1869, before he had taken his degree, he was offered a professorship at Brussels, which he accepted. His health was never good. Nietzsche's Superman is very like Siegfried, except that he knows Greek. Nietzsche was not consciously a romantic. Indeed, he often severely criticized the romantics. Aristotle's magnanimous man is very like what Nietzsche called the noble man. Nietzsche's criticism of religions and philosophies is dominated entirely by ethical motives. He admires certain qualities which he believes to be only possible for an aristocratic minority. The majority, in his opinion, should be only means to the excellence of the few and should not be regarded as having any independent claim to happiness or well-being. He sees no objection to the ordinary man's suffering if it is necessary for the production of a great man. Thus, the whole importance of the period from 1789 to 1815 is summed up in Napoleon. The revolution made Napoleon possible. That is its justification. Napoleon made nationalism possible. Almost all of the higher hopes of this century, Nietzsche says, are due to Napoleon. Nietzsche is fond of expressing himself paradoxically and with view to shocking conventional readers. He does this by employing the words good and evil with their ordinary connotation and then saying that he prefers evil to good. His book, Beyond Good and Evil, really aims at changing the reader's opinion as to what is good and what is evil. Nietzsche believes to endure as well as inflict pain for important ends. He admires a strength of will above all things. I test the power of a will. He regards compassion as a weakness to be combated. Nietzsche is a passionate individualist, a believer in the hero. The misery of a whole nation, he says, is of less importance than the suffering of a great individual. The misfortunes of all these small folk don't together constitute a sum total, except in the feelings of a mighty man. Nietzsche dislikes the New Testament, but not the Old, of which he speaks in terms of the highest admiration. He is never tired of speaking against women. In his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he says that women are not as yet capable of friendship. They are still cats or birds or at best cows. Men should be trained for war and women for the recreation of the warrior. All else is folly. So Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil that we should think of women as property. Nietzsche said, the noble man will be capable of cruelty. Nietzsche condemns Christian love because he thinks it is an outcome of fear. I am afraid my neighbor may injure me, and so I assure him that I love him. If I were stronger and bolder, I should openly display the contempt for him, which of course I feel. It does not occur to Nietzsche as possible that a man should genuinely feel universal love. Obviously, because he himself feels almost universal hatred and fear. It never occurred to Nietzsche that the lust for power with which he endows his Superman is itself an outcome of fear. There are two sorts of saints, the saint by nature and the saint from fear. The saint by nature has a spontaneous love of mankind. He does good because to do so gives him happiness. The saint from fear, on the other hand, like the man who only abstains from theft because of the police, would be wicked if he were not restrained by the thought of hellfire or of his neighbor's vengeance. Nietzsche can only imagine the second sort of saint. He is full of fear and hatred. That spontaneous love of mankind seems to him impossible. I will not deny that, partly as a result of Nietzsche teaching, the real world has become very like his nightmare. I dislike Nietzsche because he likes the contemplation of pain, because he erects conceit into a duty, because the men who most admires are conquerors, whose glory is cleverness in causing men to die. His followers have had their innings, but we may hope that it is coming rapidly to an end. Jeremy Bentham, who was the recognized head of the philosophical radicals. He was born in 1748 but did not become a radical till 1808. He was painfully shy and could not without great trepidation endure the company of strangers. Bentham maintained that what is good is pleasure or happiness. What is bad is pain. Bentham held not only that good is happiness in general, but also that each individual always pursues what he believes to be his own happiness. John Stuart Mill says, pleasure is the only thing desired. Therefore, pleasure is the only thing desirable. He argues that the only thing visible are things seen, the only thing audible are the things heard, and similarly, the only thing desirable are things desired. Ethics is necessary because men's desire conflict. The primary cause of conflict is egotism. Most people are interested in their own welfare than in that of other people. Karl Marx is usually thought of as the man who claimed to have made socialism scientific and who did more than anyone else to create the powerful movement which, by attraction and repulsion, has dominated the recent history of Europe. He was born in 1818 and had been profoundly influenced by the French during the Revolutionary and Napoleonic era. And his ancestors had been rabbi, but his parents became Christian when he was a child. In 1843, he went to France to study socialism. There he met Engels, who was the manager of a factory in Manchester. Through him, he came to know English labor condition and English economic. He thus acquired, before the Revolution of 1848, an unusually international culture. He spent the rest of his life, with a few brief intervals, in London, troubled by poverty, illness, and the death of children. Bergson was the leading French philosopher of the present century. Thus, we shall have philosophies of feelings inspired by the love of happiness, inspired by the love of knowledge, and practical philosophies inspired by the love of action. One of the bad effects of an anti-intellectual philosophy, such as that of Bergson, is that it thrives upon the errors and confusions of the intellect. Hence, it is led to prefer bad thinking to good, to declare every momentary difficulty insoluble, and to regard every foolish mistake as revealing the bankruptcy of intellect and the triumph of intuition. William James, 1842 to 1910. He was recognized the leader of American philosophy.